It is the crossover episode they've waited for since August of 2023. Sam Panayotovich, Matt Landis. It's Chicken Dinner meets the Props and Hops podcast. And I'll tell you what, Matty, I haven't done live radio since 2019. So if I'm a little bit rusty, please forgive.
All good. I think I am coming up on 300 episodes pretty soon, and I might sound rusty every single go at it. So all is definitely forgiven. Excited to get this show on the road.
So there's plenty to touch on. We're going to talk about, first of all, how we met. We're going to get into the meeting at Bet Bash, how we go about our daily stuff, how we attack the board, what we look for. I think there's a conversation, how the sausage is made, how I make mine, how I make yours. I know we both look at a lot of sharp books and see where they're at. I mean, if you look at certain sports books, not only in this country, but offshore, you can really see where the money's coming in and where the stances are being made. And then I know you're like a man about town. You got a bunch of things going on leading into Super Bowl week, but I want to start with our meeting in Vegas because we've been following each other for a while. But we ran into each other at Bet Bash 3, and you take it from there because the first thing I said was what?
As I recall, I'm just pumped to meet you, trying to get my words out correctly and make sure I don't butcher my own name. And immediately you say crossover episode. And I was so blown away that you had any interest in even partnering in this type of capacity. So it was an obvious yes for me. And I know it's been a bit of a wait since that first conversation at Bet Bash, but with the Super Bowl coming up, making the most of the bye week, I'm not sure we could have picked a much better time to make it happen.
Yeah, there's so many conversations to have. And it's funny, we start this show on Thursday night. It's 8:00 on the East Coast. You're on the West Coast. I don't know when the email is coming from the Superbook. I've been texting those guys all day because they're going to unveil the 500 prop packet, and maybe we get a sneak peek at that. I know that Jeff Sherman has been tabulating the Travis Kelce and Caitlin Clark props, the star guard for the Iowa women's basketball team. But I guess just through the Bet Bash experience, I think it was good. And you know, I've known of you for a while. I've heard you on VSiN. I started at VSiN in 2018, and you used to go on all those shows, and I knew who you were. Everybody says you're super sharp, you're well connected, you know the game. And I think Bet Bash was interesting because I was expecting a lot more shit. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of the people that attend Bet Bash are the ones that are in your mentions and talking smack, and you don't know this and you think you know that. And there was not one confrontation at Bet Bash, which if I would have made a line, like here's the amount of people that are going to come up to you and like try and start a fight, I would have made it 2.5 juice to the over. And that would have been a horrible line because nobody said anything to my face. And to me, that was a little surprising.
Yeah, I think first off, credit to Spanky. He runs a pretty tight ship when it comes to making sure that everybody at a bare minimum is treated with respect at Bet Bash. And I also think a lot of it ties in with human nature, where gambling Twitter, frankly, all of Twitter and much of the internet can be such a cesspool at times. But getting to know people face to face tends to break down some of those walls. And I think when we have people coming together at the same place at the same time with such a shared passion, in a lot of great ways, I think that brings out the best in people. So I had no idea what to expect going to the first Bet Bash in New Jersey. I think that was summer 2021. Ooh. And right off the bat, it just seemed like it was destined for bigger and better things. And we're about exactly midway through Bet Bash 3 and Bet Bash 4. I've already got my ticket, and I'm already getting close to counting down the days for the next one. So it says a lot about what Spanky's put together. And also, again, just to when we can come together in person, I think the tone of some of the conversations shifts in a dramatic way, largely for the better.
So this show is going to air not only here on your StreamYard, the Props and Hops StreamYard, but it'll be in audio book form, if you will, on the Chicken Dinner podcast that will drop tomorrow. And Matt and I are basically going to just chop this up. I don't know how long it's going to go. My target was around an hour because I think we can cover a lot of ground here. But I guess you start, and then I can piggyback on that. Like, when did you start realizing that you wanted to help other people? Because that's really what this is. I mean, that's what my podcast is for. I don't sell picks. I hope I never have to sell picks. I did a podcast because it was a way for me to express myself in free form. I'm a radio guy at heart, grew up in Chicago doing radio, and I was doing the VSiN stuff, and then I was doing stuff in Chicago, and now I work at Nesson in Boston. But I'm part of a bigger thing. And this was always a platform for me. It started just talking to my friends because at the beginning, nobody was listening. And it's sort of grown into something where I do want people to make money. I want people to make smarter bets. I want them to stop making dumb decisions. I want them to stop making 13-leg parlays and they were so close. They won 11 out of 13. I want people to get better habits. Do I know everything? Absolutely not. But I do think that I can share things I've learned and people that I've talked to. Like networking to me is super huge, as you know. So when did you know that you wanted to help other people make money? Because that's really like that's what I try and do. I'm sure you're very similar.
Yeah, and as you outlined that, my first thought is, oh man, is it a bad thing that I don't recall one specific moment? But on the other hand, I feel like maybe I'm very fortunate that it didn't come down to any one specific moment. It's been a very gradual and organic process. So a little over a decade ago, I started betting, and my first deposit was at a Square offshore book. I put down $50, and I wanted to maintain, like a $5 or $10 bet size, just starting very small at the very beginning. And I think I quickly realized that even if I wasn't trying to help people in a very big public facing way, something like what I consider the best break of my betting lifetime, discovering David Malinsky's work. At the time, he was writing a daily column called Point Blank at pregame.com that later went to SBR Sportsbook Review picks.com. And Dave has unfortunately had suddenly passed away coming up on 6 years ago, but his legacy, I mention it all the time. Regular Props and Hops listeners will be well aware of that fact. But getting to know him, and in his forum, I just talked about in our previous question how so much of gambling Twitter and the internet at large can feel like a cesspool at times. That was the most dignified discourse I could have ever expected coming from sports gamblers and people who had a reputation, especially in the pre-PASPA days, is, figures in a pretty shady underground, as people like to look at it. But everybody was just so friendly. Dave set the tone. There were so many people in the Point Blank forums that I just got to know over time, and having daily interactions where sometimes I felt like I was trying to get more help than I was able to offer help to others. And this ultimately grew into a relationship with Dave where he approached me leading up to the 2017 NFL season and asked if I wanted to co-host a podcast with him. And I was stunned because I felt like it should have been the other way around. I should have been begging Dave to work with me in any possible capacity. He's the legendary bettor. He's the really smooth talker, knows everything about everything. And for him to come to me, that triggered something that, okay, maybe there's something I have to offer that I haven't really consciously thought through yet. And just getting uncomfortable trying to figure out what the heck a podcast was, how to make it work, and just really leaning into that with a partner like Dave over the course of the 2017 NFL season. I think just really launched things to another level. And since then, just keeping, Props and Hops up and running since I started it in 2020. It's been really inspiring to see ways that I've tried to help people, but really ways that it's sharpened my own process. So it's, in some ways, I hope that it's selfless, but in a lot of ways it's selfish because I've become a better bettor. I've made a lot of friendships. I've benefited from the show as much as any listener who thinks that they might have benefited the most. So I like to think that it's been a very mutually beneficial kind of endeavor in that sense.
Well, it's the people you have on your show. You have certain people. I know you had, Cleve TA on the other day, and like just the knowledge that these people have. But you also, because you know how to bet, you know how to find an edge. But you have to when you're hosting your own podcast and doing your own content, you have to know the right questions to ask. You have to be sort of professorial. And I think that's, I never met Dave Malinsky. I knew of him. I read his stuff. I used to listen to him on VSiN. I never got the chance to meet him, break bread with him, have a cigar with him, whatever. But I think a lot of what he did sort of rubbed off on you. No?
I will take that as the highest compliment possible. And I like to think that through the time we spent together and just how much I try to reflect on lessons, he had so many timeless lessons. And I think I would have been selling myself grossly short if that were not to have been the case. And even if it weren't such a conscious effort, I think when somebody really respects what another person does and gets to spend time with them, it's almost an automatic that to some extent that's got to happen.
Yeah, and I think we both at younger ages and at earlier times we had to understand that we didn't know everything. Nor do I still act like I know everything. I mean, the day we stop learning, especially as bettors, is the day we die and the day we stop finding set edges. And I wanted to bring up a thread that you had posted. I want to say it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago about price sensitivity. And this is something that's so important. And I promise you, we're going to get into the Super Bowl and get our thoughts on that and talk about props, because this is the Props and Hops podcast, for crying out loud. But the price sensitivity, to me, I always say, right team, right time, right price, right time, get the right number. It's so important. I'll have people that will like there's a game today in my backyard, Celtics and Lakers. The line opens 10.5. At 1 o'clock Eastern, it's 11.5, 12. And it doesn't sound like LeBron and Anthony Davis are going to play. And they get ruled out about 4 Eastern. The line goes as high as 15. And there are people on social like, Celtics minus 15 is a good bet. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And there's going to be somebody somewhere that lays 15. The game's going to land 14. They're going to lose by 1 and go, damn, Vegas knows. And it's funny because not really. That's not exactly how it goes. I mean, this line has moved almost 5 points in one calendar day. And the sharpest people laid the 10.5, 11 out to 12. And then news gets out. And then the people that grab the 12.5, 13 might be okay. But anybody laying 15, whether they win or not, Matt, is making a bad bet.
And that reminds me, as I springboard into this topic, one more note from the late, great David Malinsky. He would often talk about the way a lot of people would handicap a game. And really, they might throw out impressive stats and be very smooth in their delivery. But what most people are doing is essentially explaining why the point spread is exactly what it is. And to try to take it to another level, it's trying to find things that aren't priced in. And therein lies the edge. So with this thread from a few weeks ago, what I was trying to cut to the core of is that what we often think of as trivial differences aren't all that trivial at the end of the day. I think at a broad level, a lot of us get that. But at a more granular level, a lot of us as bettors, especially those of us who might be earlier on in a journey as a sports bettor, might struggle when it comes to how to apply that in a concrete way. So trying to post a thread and do something to help solve that dilemma that a lot of us are constantly wrestling with. An example I gave was that point spreads and totals at a lot of books, they're offered at a quote unquote flat minus 110. But if people want to shop around a little bit, there are some books that are known to offer minus 108 as a standard price. And for a lot of people, the first reaction might be minus 108, minus 110. We're talking a difference of 2 cents. Who the hell cares? And my response to that would be that if we look at somebody who hits 52% of the time, you lose laying 110. You're profitable laying 108. And by the way, 52% doesn't sound great. That is pretty good if we're talking efficient markets like full game spreads and totals in some of these major sports. So even if you're hitting less than 52%, you're going to lose whether you're laying 110 or 108, but you'll lose less laying 108, and that's going to keep you in the game longer. And for a lot of people, it's just entertainment value as well as trying to find some betting value. And Sam, more recently, since I posted that thread, I think a couple of props from the AFC Championship game helped to underscore the point. There were multiple examples in that same game where every single yard mattered, just like every single cent can matter. So Justin Watson, Chiefs tight end, receiving yards closed at 16.5, but he was available at 13.5 earlier in the week.
14,
sounds like a
15,
trivial difference. 3 yards, one catch for 16. So if you bet the close, kind of like your example about Lakers Celtics, if you're buying high, then it might sound like a trivial difference, but it can make all the difference at the end of the day. On the other side, Odell Beckham Jr. receiving yards were offered as high as 22.5, close to 20.5. He had 22 yards in the game, if I recall correctly. A 2-yard difference did make the difference when it came to OBJ. So when I think about this and try to step back from just the AFC title game, I'm reminded that a lot of the best bets I've made aren't bets where I've known exactly what I wanted to bet and then logged into my accounts to try to find the odds. It's where I've taken some time to expand the menus, just poke around, see what stands out relative to prices that I've seen at other books. And to quote the logic of sports betting, which was quoting the movie Rounders, spot the sucker. In my experience, the price really does trump the handicap. So I know there's a saying, just pick winners. That's really good for clicks and downloads, a lot more clicks and downloads than I'll ever probably get. And I think if your goal as a bettor is to find as much entertainment value as possible and just kick back and have a good time, no problem, so long as you're gambling responsibly. But if your goal is to make money in this, the saying just pick winners is a pretty big oversimplification. And I think it's picking the right price that makes all the difference.
And by getting the right price, you win more games. It's just the reality. And this was my favorite part of your thread. And I'm going to retweet this on Chicken Dinner for the people tomorrow when I post the episode on Friday. Bottom line, Matt says, the difference between minus 110 and minus 108 may seem negligible, but over time, the price isn't everything. It's the only thing. You couldn't have said it any better.
I think I had some inspiration from a quote that has been misattributed to Vince Lombardi. I think there's a different football coach who had thrown that out there. But yeah, winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. I think that ties right into your point. If price isn't everything, it's the only thing. You can just swap in pricing and winning. They're almost synonymous. When you're getting the best of the number, you're going to rack up a lot more winners in the long run.
I wanted to also discuss, I sent you a couple texts and, Benson is very, what's the word? Transparent, maybe honest is a better word on Twitter. Jeff Benson.
Brutally honest. Sure.
Circa Sports. And, there was a conversation because somebody asked about, why is 55% this glorified statistic? Why do people shoot for 55%? And Benson had said basically, look, if you're betting 1,000 a game and you win at 55%, that's not a bad clip. And there was a follow-up question from @PolkitAgar16912. Thank you for answering that. Why would you welcome their business in your model if somebody is hitting 55%? Because that's less money in Circa's treasury. And Jeff responded, as he always does, quote, if we book hard to that person's action, we can write more on the opposite side and be even more profitable. And this is something I've done since I got to NESN. I've gotten an understanding and I've gotten to know Jeff Davis at Circa. And I respect his hockey brain more than almost anybody's. And as you know, we have the Bruins on our network and we have to know all these Bruins angles and how to bet the Bruins. And now it's give us your same game parlay for the Bruins, which is a different conversation for a different day. But I would be lying if I said I didn't look at the hockey lines every morning the Bruins play. And the first number I look at is the Circa number. And I will compare that to the other numbers. So if I see DraftKings, let's say the Bruins are on the road in Detroit and Circa's got minus 132 and DraftKings has minus 125 and FanDuel has minus 130 and MGM has minus 127. That line is telling me, even though it's 2 cents off FanDuel, from 132 to 130, that tells me that either A, Jeff respects the Bruins, or one of his sharp cats respect the Bruins. And he didn't tell me that, but I can see it.
I think to expand on that point, the value to me, and I think a lot of bettors who might not be the ones who have a proven track record of hitting 55% over a significant sample and are betting professionally into one of the sharpest books in the world, we can still use that information via the odds that we see as a good source of truth. And an example in my own betting would be that in the NFL, I bet a lot of teasers. And I have come around to the notion that it doesn't have to be militant, only cross through 3 and 7. There are ways to get creative, but I think I don't want to get too fast and loose with it. I try to find as many edges in teasers as I can, typically crossing through those key numbers. And unfortunately, this doesn't apply to the Super Bowl. As much as the Chiefs +8 would be a dynamite teaser leg, it takes 2 to tango, and I'm not about to tease a total in the NFL. But on a regular season NFL board, let's say a consensus for Team X is +1.5, and then we can see a Circa, a Chris/bookmaker, and or a Pinnacle all go to +1. That means to me that it's probably go time to fire on that teaser leg if I have another strong leg to pair it with, because the indication from these sharp books is that those +1.5s are going away. So if this line closes +1 and you've got +7.5 in pocket as part of a standard 6-point teaser, you're getting 6.5 points for the price of 6. And by the way, that's a free half point on top of crossing through 2 of the most key numbers in existence. When we think about Super Bowl props, something a little bit more applicable right now, I think about line shopping, and this is just, it's Christmas Day for line shoppers. Sometimes it's overwhelming if you try to have a life outside of shopping the lines at this time of year. But if you can get a clearly better price at a recreational book compared to the no vig line at a Pinnacle or a bookmaker, it's probably worth considering making that bet at the rec book, even if you haven't handicapped it for yourself. So overall, I think that without even betting at some of these really sharp books like the Circus of the world, there's still so much value in knowing what their lines are, because that reflects a lot of the sharpest opinions and the sharpest and highest volumes of money in this whole marketplace. So my MO is I don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I just like having these books at my disposal so I can know how to align my portfolio with that of the smartest guy in the room.
I imagine you use an odd screen. I'm going to just assume that you have one. I use
Mm-hmm.
one too. I'm very happy with it. And what I do, and I think it's fascinating because I've been able to sort of learn how to read the screen. And it took, man, it took probably 10 years to figure out how to read it. To be honest with you, to like understand, like, okay, this happened, this is going to happen. And it's so next level for so many people. You know, I pulled it up on my phone one day. I'm out at a bar and I'm like, see, like, you need to know where the market is, not just one book. You need to have an understanding of where a lot of these books are, like 5, 10, 15. If you only have one out, not only are you only getting one price, but you have nothing to compare it to. And my screen every morning when I roll out of bed, first thing I do is lift the screen, my laptop screen, and power up the odd screen. And the way I do it, and I'm different than maybe you are, I've got the Vegas columns to the left, I've got the domestic ones in the middle, and then the offshore ones to the right. And they're color coded, and red is recent for me, like a 2-minute move, and then there's yellow and green, and you can really get as creative as you want. I know some people have a million colors, and I would lose my mind. But if I couldn't compare book A to book B to book C to book D, I wouldn't I wouldn't be able to do my job, man. And that's an admission, but it's real. Like if I only could operate off one out and not see what other people were doing, I'd be lost.
Well, something that stands out to me from what you just said, you use the word admission. And I feel like for a lot of bettors, there might be this sense of pride in coming up with something on your own and really doing something from the ground up. And to those who can succeed with that type of process, more power to you. You're probably way sharper than I will ever be. And I will gladly concede that. And at the same time, something that you might view as an admission, I think is hopefully also very liberating or empowering for a lot of bettors, because we don't have to have all the answers within ourselves. We can just use tools and kind of triangulate based on information that is publicly available from other really sharp sources. So just like, people like to give some books crap, say, oh, you're just copying Circa's line, or Pinnacle just moved, so you're moving on air. Yeah, that might be true. And from a risk management standpoint, I get where that's frustrating as a bettor, but we can play that same game in a similar way. And it's not entirely on any one bettor to come up with something from the ground up, and just using these tools as a resource, taking some of the pressure off yourself. In my own betting journey, that has also helped me to look at things with a clearer mind. And I'm not maybe as frazzled with what do I have to come up with. And it's just trying to take a step back and benefit from great work that so many sports books or other bettors are already putting out there.
If somebody were to come to a live props and hops show, let's say you're doing it in an auditorium or whatever, and it's packed with people, and somebody raises their hand and says, Matt, what's the most important thing I need to know about sports betting? How would you answer that?
I mean, I think the answer to most questions in life along those lines would be it depends. And I'm not going to make it too boring along those lines. But I would want to know, what's this person's goal? Are you in this because, hey, you're a fan of the Chiefs or the Raiders or whatever the team may be, and you just want a bit of an extra sweat when they're playing, and you just want to juice up the entertainment value? Do you want to be a professional bettor? Do you want something in between where you're not going to go pro, but you would like to try to make money? Sort of that rec sharp type of approach. And I'm going to assume something more along the lines of that rec sharp type of approach, because I think if I were to have a crowd for a live props and hop show, that's probably who most of these bettors would consider themselves to be. And building on, I think, what we just talked about with some of these sharper books or information that's out there, I think it was kind of an epiphany for me as I was starting this show that curation is what I like to view as my form of creation, and that there's an infinite amount of work that any one bettor can try to do on their own. And it's important to be able to think for yourself. So there's a fine balance here. But really, at the end of the day, if I'm trying to give somebody one piece of advice who might be early in their journey, it's that there are so many smart people and so many sharp sources of information that are free or very low cost and very easily accessible. Any podcast player, some different websites. And taking advantage of that before you try to reinvent the wheel on your own can save you so much time and so much money. So I think that sometimes I get that there's a lot of pride in building something from the ground up on your own, and I wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. But if somebody's running into a brick wall trying to do that, there are a lot of other avenues that I think a lot of people fail to consider at times, and that's where I think a lot of the gold really lies.
So I did ask you an open-ended question, and I think you handled that very, very solidly. What I was getting at though was like for somebody that wants to stop losing, what
Okay.
do I need to know? What do I need to do?
Mm.
And I'm going to give this a shot here. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. And yes, I can share screen here. This will be a little boring for those of you that are going to be uh, watching it on. Well, if you're listening, you're not going to have any idea what I'm doing here. But I'm going to just share this. Oh, it won't let me share. Okay. So what I was going to say is know what you're good at and know what you're bad at. And I was
Mm.
planning on sharing my spreadsheet right here where I have these bets I've made, not only tracked, but tracked by sport, by year,
Mm.
and I have basically 13 columns. One column is total. Then I have NFL, college football, college basketball, NBA, baseball, NHL, college baseball, soccer. And the sports I'm not good at, I either don't bet them anymore or I figure out what the hell I'm doing wrong. I think so many people, and I know a lot of you want to just do this and have fun with it and bet 5, 10, $20. But if you're tired of losing 5, 10, $20, which adds up and could be hundreds per month, why are you still betting the NBA if you can't beat it? Like the theory that you're due is not true. Like you're doing something wrong to be, 20 and 52 in a certain sport. Now that's not the biggest sample size in the world, but if you're 20 and 52 in something, you got to figure it out, you know?
Yeah, and so to more directly answer your question along those lines, I think my first answer, if somebody's struggling and they've been losing a lot, the first answer would probably be to bet less. If you don't have a clear cut edge and you're laying vig, then the less you bet, by definition, the better your ROI will be. But to not be too much of a wet blanket, piggybacking on your approach, thinking what gets measured gets improved. And in my own bet tracking, I've tried some of the aggregators that will do a lot of it in an automated way for you. And there's a lot of value to that in saving time. But I have struggled to find something that I think can match just what I do by hand, which is like you said, by sport, by year, but also by bet type. So if it's NFL sides, totals, I bet a lot of teasers, so that's got its own category. I bet a lot of props, so that's its own category. If there are derivatives, it can get pretty specific. So you can say, hey, on sides, my ROI might be negative 10%, so might want to pump the brakes there. But when I attack this derivative, I'm actually turning out a decent profit. And another nod to the book, The Logic of Sports Betting, they talk a lot about expanding the attack surface. I think for a lot of bettors who are losing a lot, it's probably bettors who are betting same game parlays and full game point spreads, maybe full game totals. And there are some edges hiding in plain sight. I think this is one I wish I came on to earlier, but the cat's out of the bag. In the NBA, there were prices built into props that were basically a pure derivative of the full game spread and total when it comes to first team to score, race to 10, race to 15, and so on. Well, if you've got a team where hey, this team always wins the tip, or this team sucks at winning the tip off, you almost know who's going to start the game with possession, and you can get monster edges there. I think in Major League Baseball, there was something that made the rounds within the unabated community. I don't recall the specifics, but I think it was first inning or first five. There were things that were unaccounted for in the lines. And if you just paid attention, these are edges that are often hiding in plain sight. So some things, the edges have come and gone, but there's always something you can get just by paying more attention and digging deeper than a same game parlay or a full game spread or total. So trying to use a broader attack surface as your friend, as a lot of these rec books are trying to offer props on everything under the sun. You might run into limits and things might get tougher down the road. But if you just want to flip from a losing bettor to somebody who has a chance to win, I think broadening the attack surface is probably the quickest ticket to accomplishing that.
Is there anything you wanted to cover before we started talking about the Super Bowl, the props, all these derivative markets? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of process or how to?
I've got a couple questions for you that might come up over the course of a Super Bowl conversation, or I might pepper you with them later. But I know we're half an hour in, so if you want to dive into the Super Bowl, then I'm more than ready to do it.
But I feel bad because this is your show. I'm driving the car on
This
your
this is
turf.
our show right now. Yeah, yeah, let's go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can tell you the 5 bets I've made so far, prop wise. I haven't bet the side yet. Full disclosure, I was hoping that Kansas City was going to go off as the favorite. It doesn't look like that's going to happen because when I saw after the NFC Championship, the 2.5s turned to 2, turned to 1.5 to 1. I'm like, damn, KC might blow through 0. And then the resistance came on Monday and Tuesday. They laid 1.5. We saw a sharp group come out, play the Niners on the money line -0.25. So I haven't checked the line in the last half hour. I'm going to guess we're still San Francisco 2 with a total of 47.5. Yeah, still painted 2 pretty much everywhere and painted 47.5. So it hasn't really changed, at least in the last hour or so. But I haven't done side or total yet. The first bet I made was the first touchdown will be a rushing touchdown at plus 135. You're going to notice a trend here. There's a lot of plus. First touchdown will be rushing at plus 125. We know the price on McCaffrey. What's he, -$3 to score a touchdown at any time? We know that the Chiefs like Pacheco. There's a lot of talk about Mahomes and Kelsey and Rashee Rice and all the weapons on San Francisco, the Debos, the Ayuks, the Kittles. But first touchdown is a passing touchdown, -160? Ugh. I was all over that plus 130. All over it.
I'm taking a quick look. I believe when these teams last played in the Super Bowl, again, sample size of one game, I'm going to confirm here quickly. I think it might have been Mahomes rushing for the first touchdown. So we have had scenarios where, while Mahomes is known as a prolific passer in high leverage games, he can pull something off on the ground as well. So it's not just Pacheco or McCaffrey. And in the Super Bowl, who knows what we're going to see? We've seen Andy Reid get really creative. It looks really silly when it doesn't work. But I think with these two play callers, I haven't dove into this yet, but I would say even if you're just looking at McCaffrey and Pacheco, there are more options than that. Purdy was impressive with his mobility in the NFC title game. Some of that maybe out of necessity, coming out of a deficit that the 49ers better hope they don't face against Kansas City on, a week from Sunday. But there are multiple paths to get this home, and these coaches could get really creative. So I don't have a strong opinion on it yet, but I struggle to find a really strong case to go against it, especially at a nice plus money payout. Speaking of price sensitivity, a nice plus money payout.
There was no way I was laying 160 on the first touchdown to be a passing touchdown. I'll rip through the next 4 here. Mahomes under 1.5 passing touchdowns, plus 115. That's gone. I have Juszczyk over 2.5 receiving yards at -110. 49ers most possession time, -105. And this is just, I'm gambling on this last one. There will be a 60-yard field goal. Yes, 40-1. I have no math behind it. I saw it and I couldn't not bet it.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts here. First off, on the field goal prop, these kickers have big legs. And I know that Moody's accuracy has been rough lately. He's been spraying the ball all over the place. But I think it was when he was at Michigan in the college football playoff just over a year ago, he hit, if I recall correctly, a 58-yarder from the wide hash. In college, they've got those wider hashes. He hit a 58-yarder with room to spare in their college football playoff semifinal against TCU. And then Harrison Butker against Buffalo just last year. This was, I think, a pretty brisk fall day at Arrowhead. So outdoors, not the best kicking conditions. And he nailed a 62-yarder with plenty of room to spare. So, of course, you're taking a 40-1 flyer. It's much less likely to happen than it is to happen. But with that kind of payout, at the very least, I think some kickers with really strong legs. And if we're at the end of a half and a team's got the ball around the 45-yard line of the opponent, then both of these kickers could at the very least have a decent shot at hitting it. So it's a long shot, but I can see why it's enticing at 40-1. Now, I'm going to ask about, I think,
so far. What about, did you want to follow up on something else?
One question. So on the, I think you also said Mahomes under 1.5 passing touchdowns in the range of -110 being what you got.
No, plus 15 I was able to get.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. There you go. Yeah. Even better. Much. Okay. So Mahomes under 1.5 passing touchdowns at plus 115. So with that, I see a bit of correlation to the first prop you mentioned about the first touchdown to be a rushing touchdown. Because if the first touchdown of the game is a Chiefs passing touchdown, you don't want to be kind of screwed and looking at 0-2. Did you factor that into your approach at all? Where, of course, it's not completely correlated, but when there is a bit of correlation like that, do you bring that into your bankroll management approach when it comes to the Super Bowl portfolio?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I lean under in the game too at 47 and a half. I feel like the number's right, and it's tough to short two teams that have, explosivity and then maybe the most talented quarterback of all time. It's tough to bet unders in games like this. But I have a feeling this is going to be a game where we're going to see a lot of running the football, and you're going to see a lot of San Francisco specifically try and keep Mahomes off the field. Because to me, the most alarming thing last week was Baltimore coming into that game having established the number one running attack in the league, number one running offense, and they ran the ball with backs 6 times. I couldn't understand it. It made no sense. They tried to turn Lamar into a pocket passer for 4 quarters, and then they abandoned the run down by 10. Which is insanity. Kyle Shanahan's probably not going to do that. He's probably going to run the ball, and if he can get McCaffrey going, it'll open up this game not only for Brock Purdy, but it keeps 15 on the sideline. So that's the handicap. I could be completely wrong about this, but that's the way I sort of see it shaking out. And the other part of that correlation was Niners have more possession time at minus 105. Mm-hmm. I just feel like their offense has the ability, if they do it right, to run the ball against the weakness of KC's defense, which is the run game. They're much better against the pass than they are against the run. I feel like I'm acting like I could coach the Niners better than Kyle Shanahan right now, which isn't true. But run the damn ball.
I feel like compared to what we saw out of Baltimore, the Niners are going to heed that advice much more so than the Chiefs' previous opponent. And Sam, I have a couple picks I'll definitely share. I also love to nerd out on the process, as the regular Props and Hops audience will understand and hopefully appreciate. But one more follow-up for you as you outlined that approach. I got the sense that a lot of the props that you have placed so far align with how you expect the game to play out. So would it be a fair assumption that you've kind of thought through a type of game script that you consider to be fairly likely and used that to then back into via the prop bets that you're looking to make?
Yeah, that's a fair case. I mean, I do think San Francisco is going to win the game, despite everybody in my office saying you can't bet against Mahomes. I understand all that, but in all reality, I mean, this is a Kansas City team that might be what's the word? Not weak, because weak's not fair. It's the least talented room of receivers he's ever had since being in Kansas City. And I don't know that the Niners are going to win. I think they're going to win. I don't know that. Nobody does. It's a 2-point line. But I don't know that the Chiefs are going to be able to just have the ball for 35, 40 minutes. I don't see that in this game. And I'm looking at, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. And they've got to be better than they were against Detroit. But in some weird way, man, obviously Mahomes is way better than Goff. But the Lions have better playmakers, right? I mean, with Gibbs and Montgomery and St. Brown and Laporta. I mean, the Lions have more weapons than the Chiefs. And it feels weird to say that, but I truly believe in that.
So with your belief in that and the alignment that your props have thus far, I want to present kind of a counter to it and see what you think here. If you're okay to dance around this topic a bit, of should you or should you not align your prop bets with your envisioned
Is this what you just say you're wrong about everything?
I can't. No way. Again, like you said, there are too many people who know too much more about this stuff than I do to have a really strong opinion on it. But I find it to be an interesting conversation topic because I think it's common around this time every year for a lot of people to advise as a starting point to bet Super Bowl props. Okay, how do you think the game's going to go, and bet props that align with that game script more or less. And my first concern with that approach is that while you could set yourself up for the best betting day of your life, if you're right, you might be in for a windfall. If you're taking the points, I guess in your case, if you're laying the points with San Francisco and taking a lot of props that would align with a similar game script, that could be great. But if your envisioned game script is not correct, you don't want to do anything to, dance around with that risk of ruin. So I guess I try to find props that are as resilient as possible to different game scripts. And it's a takeaway that was underscored when I spoke with Cleve TA last week. We were talking about a few different props, and he liked pursuing angles where you had a lot of different bites at the apple, depending on how the game unfolded. You weren't maybe as fragile, one could say. So I think of a prop. I haven't bet this yet, but it's got my attention. Something like perhaps Christian McCaffrey rushing plus receiving yards to the over. And if I'm going to bet this, I don't have a lot of time to make up my mind, because everybody who flies into Vegas over the next week is going to be looking to bet something along those lines, a superstar to the over being the ultimate public play. But like you said, if the Niners are doing pretty well, they can just feed McCaffrey and churn up plenty of yards on the ground. If they're trailing, Kansas City does a really good job taking away opposition's top wide receivers. So McCaffrey out of the backfield might be an area that it can exploit. So whether it's a positive or a negative game script for the Niners, something like that might be pretty resilient. So I guess all in all, how much consideration do you give to, align your props with your envisioned game script, because that can give you a lot of synergy? Or should you don't want to bet props that you think are not likely to occur. So you don't want to fully go the other way, but maybe try to balance things out a little bit and give yourselves more outs in case your envisioned game script isn't what we see, because it seems like every week we're kind of surprised by game scripts that end up unfolding.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I did this last week. I did bet some Ravens stuff, but then I also had Kelsey touchdown, and he was plus 125, which was ridiculous to me because he came into the game having caught a touchdown in 10 of his last 12 playoff games. And I know that, 12 games isn't a big sample size, but I would argue the Gronks of the world and the Kelseys of the world, they just play at a different level in the postseason. So 10 out of 12 playoff games spoke volumes to me. And what do you know? He catches the first touchdown and plus a quarter, you cash that ticket. You see his price this game, minus 130. So it's already swung 50 cents. I don't know. Because if you bet pro Chief and pro Niners stuff, there's a world where you just juice out. Especially because a lot of people are going to bet the Mahomes overs and like Mahomes over 1.5 passing touchdowns at minus 130, minus 135. You go 5-5 at minus 130. I don't care what side you're betting. You go 5-5 at minus 130, you're down 1.5 units because you're down 6-5 on the juice. And I think that's my concern. As I look at my sheet now, I'm very one-sided to your point. I mean, there's the first touchdown rushing could be anybody. I mean, it could be Kansas City or San Francisco, so that doesn't matter. The field goal could be anybody. But there is correlation for sure on Mahomes under 1.5 passing touchdowns and Niners most time of possession. But even the use check, I mean, that's just one play, man. That's one play. And I was looking at this earlier. His numbers against the Chiefs have been pretty good. He's got, and I know it's not a big sample size, but Kyle Juszczyk against the Chiefs has had huge games. Like he's had like 25 yards in one game, 35 in another game. So I feel like that broken play is going to be huge because we know KC's D is good against the pass. And they also have Jones and Karlaftis, to get to the quarterback. So I do expect Purdy to have to make some plays. Here are the 4 games Juszczyk's had against the Chiefs. 26 receiving yards, 38 receiving yards, 39 receiving yards, and 34 receiving yards. And really, to me, it's about the targets. In the first matchup, 6 targets. In the second matchup, 4 targets. The third matchup, 3 targets. The fourth matchup, 4 targets. So they try and find him. This has been the script for Shanahan. Let's find the little fullback flair and give him not one, but multiple targets. And that's why I landed on him. And that number went from 0.5 yard to now 3.5 on Juszczyk.
I think that's a really sound handicap, and something you brought up before breaking down. You may have sold me on Juszczyk. The number has moved, so and maybe I'm not going to unload on this, but I'll do some shopping on him for sure. I think I might recall him having not just a fairly long reception, but a long-ish touchdown reception against the Chiefs in that last Super Bowl matchup as well. But you touch on the notion that if you go 5-5, but you're laying minus 130, that's not going to be a pretty ROI. So not to, maybe ratchet up the VIG too much, but one of my biggest process-driven angles for the Super Bowl every year, and I'd say that this is probably good advice for anybody who would say their primary goal for the Super Bowl isn't just entertainment value, but to win money. If you can stomach it, save some money for next Saturday, next Sunday, and be ready to lay some lumber. It's not always comfortable, but bets like no overtime at 10-1 or less. No safety. I feel like my cutoff is about 9-1 or less that I'm willing to lay. No kick to hit the upright, 6-1 or less. No defense or special teams touchdown, -250 or better. Yes to a team to score 3 straight times, -170 or better. Overall, these are prices that won't show at every book, but when they do show, I think it tends to be late in the betting cycle. And again, it requires some intestinal fortitude, but sometimes I think the tougher these bets are to make, that can be a sign that they might offer even more value. And the Super Bowl is this unique event where the volume of public money can profoundly affect some of these odds. And we know that most public bettors prefer a couple things. One, risk a little to win a lot, that lottery ticket mentality. And number two, rooting for chaos. I totally get why a lot of fans would want to see overtime. They'd want to see a safety. They want to see a doink. Let's see a kick hit the upright. Let's see a defensive or special teams touchdown. And I think that the availability heuristic tends to have us thinking that these rare events are more likely to occur than they actually are. Because when we do see them, it just kind of etches into our brain a little bit more strongly. And this is a way for us to take advantage. Just sit back, relax, let the public money do its thing. And then within 24 hours of kickoff, being ready to pounce. Because at the end of the day, what often feels like a pretty big price to lay for these types of bets often isn't big enough relative to the true probability. So
yeah, I imagine
I'm not doing anything with those yet, but I'm shopping.
I picture you on Super Bowl Sunday just waiting for the no on the octopus prop to come down just enough to where you could fire on the no.
I still recall, I mean, this isn't laying a huge price, but the Super Bowl where the Chiefs played Tampa Bay, I guess we're talking about this time in 2021. And Tyreek Hill had a monster game against Tampa Bay. I think it was week 12 that year, going for something like 269 yards and 3 touchdowns. And his receiving yardage prop got seamed into triple digits. And I just had a sense that I wanted to play the under. But if you're going to look toward the under for a star player 10 days before kickoff, just wait until closer to 10 minutes before kickoff. And you're, again, tying back into price sensitivity, you're probably going to get the best of the number. It wouldn't have mattered with Hill. I think he had 73 receiving yards in that Super Bowl. He came in well under regardless. But when you can get a guy under 100.5 yards, and the fair number should probably be closer to 90.5 yards, if that, then just letting the public money do its thing in certain markets can really set you up for a nice betting portfolio in those final hours and minutes before the game kicks off.
Yeah, I remember having Rufus on the show last year on Chicken Dinner, Rufus Peabody, and he told me a tale of 2 Super Bowls. He said the best Super Bowl I ever had was Patriots and Rams. It was 13-3. Everybody's under, like every under hit. It was glorious. And I think it was a year or two before was Eagles Patriots, and he said he got crushed because that was the 41-33. Brady's got 500 yards. Foles has 380. Everybody's catching balls. Everybody's scoring touchdowns. And these are, at the end of the day, these are all one-offs. I mean, this is one game on one Sunday in February, and anything is possible. And for a guy like that to admit that, I've made money on Super Bowls, but I've gotten waxed on Super Bowls. To hear that, I was like, ooh. All right, maybe I shouldn't get too crazy on this random football game in Las Vegas on a Sunday.
Well, and keeping that spirit in mind, and also the thought about props, like your first touchdown to be a rushing prop, or will there be a 60+ yard field goal prop at 40-1, thinking of the types of bets that can be resilient to a certain game script and hopefully protect you from getting too waxed no matter how the game turns out. One of my favorite props, I finally just saw it today at one pretty well-known offshore, and it's going to become more widely available, I think, in the coming days. Penalties under 10.5. We're talking accepted penalties here. And I think at a lot of shops, this is likely to open pretty widely in the range of a flat -115, if not a little better than that. But I think people are going to want to act fast when they see this if they want to make this bet, because the under tends to get steamed. I consider it good up to -130. And the handicap here, Super Bowls in general, people want players to determine the outcome. And more often than not, that means refs will err on the side of swallowing the whistle. I think this is especially true when we talk about subjective penalties like holding, roughing the passer, pass interference. Of course, we had that very high profile case last year of an official not swallowing the whistle on a close call in a crucial moment. And that defensive holding call against James Bradbury basically set up Kansas City to milk the clock and end the game with a chip shot field goal to win it. So, admittedly, I'm not an officiating expert, but my understanding is that by the book, that was a correct call. However, based on the situation and how close of a call it was, there's a lot of outrage against that flag having been thrown. I think a lot of people felt robbed that we didn't get a more dramatic ending to a really classic Super Bowl matchup. So, especially this year, I feel like everybody would prefer to avoid a repeat scenario. And if the game's close late, I think a similar play might not draw the flag. This year's referee, Bill Vinovich, has a reputation for being a bit hands-off, especially with subjective calls. I know it's an all-star crew, so I'm not going to data mine, his crew stats for all 17 or so games that they have refed together so far this season. But when we look at this year's playoffs, admittedly not a huge sample, but 7 of the 12 games have gone under. That's 58.3% equivalent to minus 140 odds on under 10.5 penalties. The Niners and the Chiefs, not very heavily penalized teams. If anything, they skew toward the middle of the league in this regard. So all things considered, I think that under 10.5 penalties is stacking up nicely. And 2 subtle edges, Sam, I'll throw your way. Then I'll see what you think of this prop. One, with the Super Bowl being played on a neutral site, home field advantage can help lead to pre-snap penalties on road teams. These are the least subjective penalties in the book, and it's really hard not to call them. We saw Houston false starting left and right against the Ravens in the wild card round. I do expect the Niners to have a slight crowd advantage in the Super Bowl, but overall, it's a much more neutral setting than we usually get, so that can help suppress some of the obvious pre-snap penalties that refs can't turn a blind eye to. And then number 2, one of my favorite things here that I've uncovered looking into this prop this year, when it comes to tempo, Kansas City below average, the Niners dead last in the league in seconds per snap. And I think it makes sense just trying to take a step back and figure both of these teams use a lot of pre-snap motion. That can take some time to develop. And for San Francisco, I feel like Shanahan probably going to want to be in Purdy's ear as long as possible to help his young quarterback get a read on Spagnuolo's scheme. Kind of similar to McVay with Jared Goff in the aforementioned Super Bowl. I know the Patriots won that one 13-3, but a coach trying to be in a young quarterback's ear as much as possible against a really good defensive schemer on the other side. And of course, a slower tempo means fewer plays. That translates to fewer chances for penalties to get called in the first place. So Sam, I know I've kind of unloaded the book on you. Any pushback, any thought on your end when it comes to about like under 10.5 accepted penalties, which I'd consider good up to minus 130?
Nope. I'm just going to look for it for the next 3 minutes and bet the under. But I don't think that's up yet. I don't think the domestics have that. So you have it offshore. I mean, we're going to get a lot of props up, not only in Vegas, but, the domestics are going to put them up. We're going to see what happens at the Superbook tonight. Circa puts theirs up on Friday. And then I imagine there's going to be some back and forth. These books are going to be looking at Superbook and Circa and get these ideas. So 10.5. Here's my question. I have no bounce back because I think you have studied this more than anybody I've ever met. What is, like, if it goes to 10 flat or 9.5, we're done, right? Like 10.5 only under?
Yeah, and so that's a great question, and I'm probably not best suited to say. I get the difference of like, okay, what if it goes from 10.5 to 10 or 10.5 to 9.5? How much juice is that worth? I don't have a perfect answer. I would say unless there was a pretty handsome plus money payout, I'm just going to steer clear if it goes south of 10.5 or if the VIG on 10.5 goes north of minus 130. A lot of books, it's just a knee-jerk reaction. Almost every year, they just price it. It used to be 12.5. And I think before I was betting fairly seriously, I think 13.5 was the going rate. So this is one of those edges that's probably not going to last forever. But I think based on some of the few books that do have it up so far offshore, it looks like that knee-jerk reaction, at least for this betting cycle, is back in play. So yeah, barring a big plus money payout, I really would want 10.5. It's silly how many games could land on 9 or 10, and it's really coming down to the wire. I feel like 7 or 8 is the most likely outcome here, but I really like that cushion. So I'll just stick to 10.5 up to minus 130 and leave it to, I don't know if it's the Steve Fezzik's of the world who, have actuary backgrounds who might be able to break it down should that number get off of 10.5 for accepted penalties.
We have gone 54 minutes. I can't believe it's been that long. It's just like two old friends having a conversation, a lot of Super Bowl stuff. But I wanted to kind of give the baton back to you and bring it home because, again, you made the offer to join the Props and Hops podcast. We're doing it on your StreamYard. You want to talk a little hops. You want to talk the Malinsky Minute, and then I'm going to let you put a ribbon on this. So I'm going to take a back seat now. I'm going to hold up my Jack and Diet Coke that I've been waiting 54 minutes to take a sip of, and I'm going to let you bring us home here.
There we go. All right. Well, I will just say is you get your Jack and Coke. Pretty soon I will open up a can I have been waiting equally long to dig into. For the audience who's watching with us on YouTube or Twitter or in podcast form on Spotify, the video will be up there. Let me try to get this properly into frame. This is a beer by the name of Party Cup. It is a lager with mosaic hops made by North Park Beer Company in San Diego. For my money, the best brewery in the best craft beer city in the country. This one clocks in at 5% ABV. It's really light, clean, and refreshing, just as you might expect from a classic lager. But with the mosaic hops, it also adds notes of citrus, tropical fruit, blueberries, a little bit of pine. So you're getting some added character here. I think this beer, as the can art would suggest, I mean, it looks like something that you'd want to use to get down on a game of beer pong or maybe a game of flip cup. I think once you taste it, it almost seems too good for something like that. But the best part is there are no rules. And my final note here would be this is also the odds-on favorite to be the beer in my hand when the Super Bowl kicks off. So, Sam, from coast to coast.
Cheers, man. I wish I had a better backstory on the Jack Daniels. I mean, there's a hint of charcoal. Yeah. Maybe some oak in there as well.
Some leathery tobacco. Yeah.
Well, and I don't have the bottle in front of me, so I'm going to go off memory here. I believe this is 40% and 80 proof, but I do mine out of the my buddy Jake Dahlberg in Chicago sent this to me. This is a chicken decanter. Yes, this is actually a chicken. So I don't have the bottle in front of me. I have this glass chicken that has my Jack Daniel. Yeah, maybe one of the best gifts I've ever gotten, but I was really not prepared for the soliloquy with the Jack and Diet. So Party Cup. You're going to be drinking that on Super Bowl Sunday?
It's a nice, again, sessionable 5% ABV. So over the course of a 3.5, maybe a 4-hour broadcast, if I have a few, I won't be losing my wit. Definitely going to ratchet up toward the IPAs or some bigger beers as the game progresses. But at least for starters, it's just a perfect baseline.
Okay, now the price on Purdy or Mahomes to win MVP against the field is like minus 270. Are you minus 270 Party Cup? Is that that's the move?
Oh, yeah, I thought we were going to go back to the Super Bowl for a second. I was going to say, well, if you like the Niners, they have a very diversified offense, so maybe you want to go toward the MVP not being Purdy or Mahomes. Yeah, I would say minus 270 is pretty light. I mean, this is almost like the NFL draft betting market where there can be a known outcome. So, in fact, I think this one might be pulled off the board after it got juiced up to maybe north of 10-1, and now we pretty much know what the result's going to be.
So that's the Caleb Williams and the Landis household. Got it.
I guess, I was talking with Ben Brown, formerly of PFF and now with Sumer Sports, a few weeks ago on this show, and it sounded like within some of the scouting community, there might be a groundswell support coming for Drake May at some point. But as a USC grad, I like where you're going there, and yeah, heavy juice and maybe not heavily juiced enough, you could say.
Well, cheers again, and then you do at the end of every show, you do the Malinsky Minute, yes?
Yes. So I think a fitting way to wrap this up would be to dive into a pillar of props and hops, a segment dedicated to the late, great David Malinsky. And for context, anybody who may not be familiar, I was so fortunate to get to know him as a friend and even a father figure in some ways. He was a great partner and mentor as we did the House of Yards podcast during the course of the 2017 NFL season. And by the way, we've talked Bet Bash a bit. I feel very strongly that Dave belongs in the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame, not just for what he did as a bettor and a handicapper, but for the way that he shared so much knowledge with so many other people. And hopefully it's just a matter of time. But among many things, having known Dave, I just got the sense that he had really mastered the balance of knowing when to grind and when to unwind. And as a result of that, I feel like he was often not just the smartest person in the room, but also the most interesting person in the room. Sometimes there's a disconnect. If you know as much as Dave did, it's hard to also be an interesting conversation at a cocktail party. But I had a thought of Dave on a recent vacation to Vienna. Sam, I swear I'll tie this back into our conversation here shortly. But I'm in Vienna taking a tour of something called the Spanish Riding School. Now, don't ask me why you have to go to Austria to see something called the Spanish Riding School, but nevertheless, this is some sort of elite horse riding school. A lot of interesting stuff to look at for a bit. And if you're wondering what elite training looks like, I was kind of blown away when they shared that for these horses, they train hard for half an hour a day, then they have active recovery for about another half an hour a day. The other 23 hours is rest. And I just kind of had a big parallel to the way that I approach things in my own life. And the takeaway was that, of course, there's a time to push the pedal to the metal, a time to shift into neutral, a time to put it in park. And bringing that into this conversation, I really tend to grind to a fault. And every time we've interacted or I've come across your content, I feel like it always reminds me to loosen up and really enjoy life. So, I mean, this is a major compliment. And I'll close it out with 2 questions for you. First off, how would you describe your approach to knowing when it is time to hustle and when you can just cut loose and relax? Because it seems like you've got that balance figured out much greater than I do.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know that that's 100% accurate, but I think it's, you have to have a balance. And, when I first got out to Nesson, I was waking up at 6, 7 in the morning and going to the screen and getting an idea, taking a mental picture of where these lines are and where these totals are. And I have sort of a steel trap. I can remember a lot of stuff. It's sort of a gift. But then I'd get into the office at 11 and I'd be at the office until 7 o'clock and get home at 7:38 and then come home and flip on a game. And it's like, all right, you got to shut this off eventually. And I learned a couple years ago that the result of the game isn't predicated on me watching it. So even as I have Wisconsin right now against Nebraska, I don't even know the score and I don't even care. So I think the philosophy has been do the work and the results will follow if you do the work right. I've tried to detach myself from biting my fingernails for 4 quarters of a football game or for the last 8 minutes of a college basketball game. Of course, I like to watch. I like to go out to the bars, drink, hang out with my friends, watch the games. But if you don't shut it off, man, from time to time, you're going to burn out. So I think that sort of plays into the question, like, how do you have your fun? You just have to sometimes, as much as it sucks, you have to put this thing down. Sometimes you got to throw it to the back of the room and just not look at it for a little bit because we are just robots at times with all the content and all the lines moving. And, it's not like the stock market when the bell rings in the morning and then the bell rings at the end. This is 24/7, 365, but you have to have a social life and you have to find that balance.
And if we may add to that, it is so well put. But one thing I took away is that even when you are putting in the work, it seems like there's still a playful spirit. And maybe that helps to avoid some of the burnout because inevitably, if there are ebbs and flows to the sports betting calendar, whatever somebody's life calendar might look like, when things really ratchet up and you have no choice but to just hustle a little bit to get through some sort of milestone, whatever the case may be, when it is, no doubt about it, time to put in the hard work and you don't want to burn out, how do you go about, maybe it's just natural, maybe there's something consciously that you do, maybe it's unconscious, but myself and others just pick up on it. It seems like even when you're really hustling, there's still such a playful spirit that goes such a long way. Any insight you can share about what goes into that and how others might be able to adopt a similar ethos?
Well, I don't have an answer for that. I certainly didn't prep for that one. I don't know. I love people. I love everything about people. I love getting to know people and asking them questions and having conversations. And contrary to popular belief, I know things about things that aren't necessarily sports things. I love a good book, nice music show, concert. Going to the movies. A nice meal. I like to cook a lot. I've been cooking a lot more since I got this house. So been doing prime ribs and smoking pork shoulders and all that. So it just you want to be versatile. You don't want to just be the guy that can only talk about sports. I think the guys appreciate that, but there are some people that just don't care about sports betting as much as I do. And understanding that people have other, things they like, they have other hobbies, they have other concerns. I think understanding that not everything that I do is what everybody wants to hear about, if that makes sense. So I just try and bring out the best of people and look, I do my fair share of shots from time to time, and that's always a nice little lubricator too.
On brand for the Malinsky minute, I thought as you were rattling off that answer, I mean, if anybody ever needed a sports betting tip, of course, Dave was a good source for it. But also, if somebody needed a restaurant recommendation, a music recommendation, a book recommendation, he was also more than up to the task for that. So, I guess, Sam, final question for you would be between you mentioned liking to cook, liking to read, watch movies, go to concerts. Any recommendations if there's just one recent standout experience in any of those areas outside of sports, anything that stands out as a highlight that you think is a lot of us prepare to maybe scale things back after the NFL season wraps up, a recommendation from you that maybe some of the audience can tap into?
Sure. So I actually have two books on my counter. I'm going to give you one sports book and one non-sports book. If you haven't read this one yet, this is the new Billy Walters book,
Mm.
Secrets from a Life at Risk. It's called Gambler by Billy Walters, of course, who went into the inaugural class of the Sports Gambling Hall of Fame at Circa, the best bettor of all time, the best winner of all time. And he lays a lot of his principles out in this book, Gambler, fantastic book. And then number two, I'm not a dad yet, but one day. This is called the Daddy Diaries. And it's by a guy named Andy Cohen. And he's got two young kids and just super relatable because I have a lot of friends who have 1, 2, 3 kids and they're pulling their hair out from every angle from time to time. But this is a good look at, let's see, here's the byline here, the backstory. New York Times bestselling author Andy Cohen goes from bottle service to baby bottles in a hilarious, heartwarming, and name-dropping account of the most important year of his life. So pretty good read, and I think many people would not have expected me to pull this book out on the show.
Yeah, if we're talking about the biggest underdog, I don't know if a 60-yard field goal would have a better payout than Haddad's been offered on that type of book.
Yeah, well, you might be right there. You might be right.
Awesome. Well, Sam, I could go for another hour. We'll have to do it maybe in the off season, maybe as Bet Bash is approaching once again. But this has been a blast, and clearly not just knowing your stuff around football or the sports media space, but well-rounded when it comes to life overall. A perfect way to wrap it up with the Malinsky Minute. So thank you for everything you've brought to this conversation, and I'm definitely looking forward to sharing some drinks together in person at Bet Bash and hopefully being in touch again before then as well.
Yeah, man, I appreciate this. Thanks for making everything happen. We're going to post this on Chicken Dinner on Friday, and I hope you listening and you watching, I hope you got something out of this as well, because again, we have to always, always keep learning.